migration. A migrant is someone who has moved across an international border or within a state away from his or her habitual place of residence. This is regardless of the person's legal status, whether the movement is voluntary or involuntary, what is the cause of the movement, and the length of stay. So I think it's important when we think about migration to really understand what do we consider to be migrants. And the question, an important question was raised here, migrants versus refugees. And of course, refugees are the ones in which case the movement is involuntary, right? So it's forced displacement, and they come under the Convention for Refugees and are eligible for a protected status. So that's a very special category of people who migrate. I think Asif mentioned this previously in his presentation, but migration, in fact, it's one of the mega trends of our century. Migration is happening at a rate now higher than ever seen in recorded history. And so that's why, I don't know, I can't speak for my other colleagues in IOM, but it's a really interesting time to be working in migration, and it's an interesting time to be reporting on migration. 1 billion people on the move. So if we think of the global population, I think it's now closer to 7.5 billion because the population is increasing rapidly. 1 billion migrants, that means 1 in every 7 persons is a migrant. So in this room, I know we've only identified 2 of us as migrants, but if I do the math, there might be some more migrants somewhere in this room. And of that 1 billion people, when we look at the numbers, in fact, the vast majority are internal migrants. So people who are moving within their country of origin. And a lot of this, as I mentioned, might be rural to urban migration. Some of this is as a result of climate change, looking for economic opportunities, educational opportunities. Oftentimes, people move because they don't find jobs or education in the place where they were born. And Asif mentioned many of the different drivers of migration. A lot of those are what are contributing to this 760 million internal migrants. And then additionally, we have a smaller number, but still very important, are the international migrants. So those who have left a nationally recognized boundary between 2 countries, international migrants. Myself, I'm an international migrant. I moved for job opportunities. And so oftentimes when we think of labor migration, skilled migrants that might be moving from one country to another to respond to skills gaps, and forced displacement oftentimes is across internationally recognized borders as well. So we have both types of migration. I have to have some technical assistance. So again, the numbers that we see are at a much higher rate. After World War II, we saw large numbers of people migrating, but in fact today those numbers are even higher. I might have to stay nearby, I don't know, having some challenges with this. And so I want to also think particularly about the context here in Bangladesh. What are the types of migration that we see? And those are both internal and international, of course. So labor migration is a large contributor. Internal displacement, and this, as we know, Bangladesh is particularly vulnerable to climate change. We see a lot of, I'm going to talk about that shortly, but climate change contributing significantly to migration. Migration to urban areas, again, looking for opportunities. that potentially are not available in the place where you were born. Irregular and forced migration. These are also happening in the Bangladesh context. So I want to pose a question to you on this topic of climate change. If the temperature, so it's now predicted in the next 30 years, so that if I look around the room, that's in our lifetimes, the temperature will increase globally 1.5 degrees. What are the implications for Bangladesh? Does anybody have an idea? What does that mean? For this country, are there particular vulnerabilities? I'll let you think about that. And as an impact, so one of those particular vulnerabilities will be change in sea level. And the predictions are that sea level will rise up to 1 meter during that time frame. And if we think about Bangladesh, a lot of the inhabited areas are very low-lying, right? And so the dangers that poses, here we have a picture of how certain communities in Bangladesh are responding to erosion, to salination of lands. Previously, where they could grow crops, maybe they can't grow crops there now. So all of these are different aspects of migration that are impacting Bangladesh in particular, but many parts of the globe. And then thinking about what does that mean for us in this room? And I think particularly in your role as journalists, you have a really valuable contribution and role to play in raising awareness about this. Because we unfortunately won't be able to turn the tide, I would say, of climate change because it's coming. The extent to which it will impact us will be different. But what we can do is learn about it and start to educate people, right? Help them prepare, think about what are the strategies. And when I think about what does it mean for Bangladeshis, I think adaptation is going to be a really important thing in the next 20 to 30 years. So one way that when we talk about communications for development, I think starting to raise awareness about climate change, the impacts that it'll have at the national level on different parts of Bangladesh is an important role to play as well. Here are some examples that I've put about people that are reporting on different news outlets that are reporting on climate change, helping people look at it not just as gloom and doom, as the certain parts of the country become inhabitable, but a nice article, this is from Thomson Reuters, talking about climate change is driving migration, but it also is leading to opportunities. That article's from India. Another one that's in Latin America, talking about the food insecurities, as I mentioned, because of salination of the lands. Some areas are no longer able to grow crops, but then also reporting on how they're responding to that. What are the coping mechanisms? What are the strategies they put in place to respond? And that can help get your audience, get your readers thinking about adapting to climate change. From CNN also talking about different frameworks and responses that can be put in place to manage climate change. Another aspect of migration that I want to talk about, of course it's not just internal, but that Bangladeshis are actually one of the largest diaspora. So across the globe you can find, in fact, over 11 million workers in 165 countries. So people from Bangladesh are everywhere in the world. And approximately 700,000 more migrating each and every year. So that's quite a wide diaspora of Bangladeshis spread across the globe. And again, thinking of how these different aspects of migration can be reported in the news. I've just shown some different examples here of media outlets that are reporting on migration, that are showing the multifaceted angles of migration, how it's affecting different parts of their population, how it's affecting the private sector, talking about the opportunities and the different ways that migrants are contributing to the societies where they are living. I included this particular article. It's based on a study, actually. The Harvard Business Review put this out a couple years ago, actually. But it's important, I think, to remember that migrants play a really important role in terms of entrepreneurship. They're business creators, they're job creators. And this has been shown through multiple studies that migrants have a higher percentage of entrepreneurship within a society. So this particular article is talking about how immigrants have a disproportionate role. They have a much larger role in entrepreneurship in the US. And that's true in countries across the globe. Migrants, if you think of it, migrants are risk takers, right? They're leaving the comfort of their homes to start a life somewhere else. And that is one of the key aspects, I think, that contributes to business creation. That migrants are willing to take a risk and start businesses on their own. One of the campaigns that I just want to mention briefly that IOM has been working on recently is called I Am a Migrant. Has anybody heard of this campaign? Seen it anywhere? Oh, none of you are following IOM on Facebook. The I Am a Migrant campaign, the goal of this is to share stories about migrants in different parts of the globe. What they are doing, because in fact when we talk about numbers and statistics, sometimes that's not as relatable. But if we share the story of someone who's a migrant, people start to understand the spectrum. People who are part of the diaspora, people who are expatriates, people who are refugees, all of these are contributing to the societies where they have arrived. And so sharing their stories, as has been done through this campaign, I Am a Migrant, it allows people to see migration in a different light, to understand the ways that that these people have resettled and are adapting to the country where they live now. And you can see also that they get quite a bit of traction on social media in terms of retweets and likes. And so I think this is an important tool that IOM is using to communicate about the spectrum of migration. And I'm going to talk about that a bit more in the next presentation. So with that, I'm going to close, but I do want to open it up. I know you've been sitting for a long time, so feel free to stretch. But does anyone have questions, particularly around the spectrum of migration?
কারো যদি কোনো কোয়েশ্চেন বাংলায় থাকে সমস্যা নেই, আপনারা করতে পারেন। We can just take the question and then respond in due course.